Welcome to the Embracing You podcast with your host, Eric Pothen. We are all on our own unique journey to discovering ourselves. Each episode, I will help you navigate the journey within to reconnect with and discover the innate love you have for yourself. This podcast will cover topics from self-love to eating disorders and body image to mental health and to overall well-being. My goal is to help you honor and embrace yourself so you may live your most authentic life. Let's dive in. Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Embracing You podcast. I hope that you all have been well and have been especially enjoying the extra daylight we've been having. I know I certainly have, as well as the warmer temps. Today, we have a very special guest on the podcast, and that is a very near and dear friend of mine, and her name is McKenzie. And McKenzie and I met at a gym in where I live currently, and we've been friends now for about 5.5 years. And she is currently a personal trainer, and I was beyond excited to ask her to be a guest on the Embracing You podcast today, where she shares a little bit more about the work that she does with her clients, as well as a little bit of her own personal story of living with disordered eating. So I don't want to say too much more here. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right. Well, good morning, McKenzie. How are you doing today?
I am good. How are you?
I am doing pretty good. I've got my coffee, so I feel like I'm ready to go.
Me too. I was like, I have my coffee prepared.
Yes, it's a necessity, especially for a morning interview, right?
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being willing to come on to the Embracing You podcast today. But to start our conversation out with one another, if you just maybe want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and maybe what you do for work.
Yeah. So I'm McKenzie. I currently live in Virginia. I am an online health and fitness coach for women. I have my bachelor's and master's degree in exercise science. So exercise, nutrition has been a big part of my life for a long time now, probably since around high school. And so I'm super passionate about helping women specifically kind of work through finding what works for them with nutrition and fitness in a healthy way and kind of breaking down some of the BS that we see in nutrition and fitness and kind of the negative things that can pop up from that because of my own personal experience within that space. So it's something I'm super passionate about.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on something we're going to dive into a little bit later in our conversation with one another. So I'm super excited and I can't wait to kind of touch on that last little nibbit you talked about with some of the common misconceptions and how you work with that with your clients. But so McKenzie, you and I know each other because we actually met at the gym years and years ago. And I'm so grateful that we were able to, establish this wonderful friendship with one another. But what called me to ask you onto this podcast was, a while ago, I saw you share part of your own story of struggling with disordered eating via social media. And so I felt really called to ask you to be a guest on the podcast because I found it really interesting that you're in the space of nutrition and wellness and fitness, but also have a lived experience with disordered eating. So before we kind of dive into your current relationship with that, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your experience with disordered eating and part of your story?
Yeah, of course. So I think it probably starts back of when I really got into strength training and fitness, which was back in 2018, I believe, which was really, I feel like when Fitspos were a big thing on Instagram. That's kind of like all you saw. And I was really deep into that stuff. Like I followed a lot of people. I also followed a lot of like competitors. So like bikini competitors, physique competitors. And so it was this weird kind of dynamic where I was really learning about fitness and nutrition and becoming really passionate about it with myself and seeing what the changes could, like how my body could change, while also at the same time I was seeing online of how other people were changing their bodies and some of the extremes that people have to go to, especially in the competitive space. And so it was kind of like a weird entanglement between what I was learning and what I was seeing online. And it got to the point where mine was getting a little bit, I was more kind of on the extreme side of things. So, I was working out 5 to 7 times a week, like doing strength training, doing super intense cardio. And I knew this might be a little bit too much, but it's also what is deemed as healthy, right? So I was doing all of these things and I was, really particular about the foods that I ate, making sure it was clean foods all the time, getting my protein. And so it definitely got to a point where it was really intense and I was kind of doing all of the things all at once, the cardio, the training, super strict nutrition, which was, great at first because it was helping me learn those healthy habits. But it just got to a point where I was taking it too far. And I got really obsessive with the gym. I got really obsessive with nutrition. I got super lean, like to the point where, I lost my cycle for 2 years. Like, and my disordered eating was really, what's the word I'm looking for? It was really like life altering, I feel like, in a way, because it kind of took over a lot of my life because I was constantly thinking about those types of things. So I feel like in short, my journey started off really healthy, right? Like I was getting into those things, I was learning about it, and then it kind of went to the extremes and turned into more disordered patterns.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I want to highlight a couple points here. One, thank you for your vulnerability because I know stepping into these spaces and sharing these very personal parts of our story can be a little scary and a little intimidating. So I just want to thank you for sharing that part of your story. But one thing that you had said was that you had lost or had gone off of your cycle for almost 2 years, which is something that's quite common with females that develop a disordered eating or an eating disorder where they don't have a period. And so I think that's something that I want to kind of like highlight and uplift for listeners that might not be familiar with some of the physiological effects of living with disordered eating and an eating disorder. Um, and the second thing that I kind of want to uplift is how you felt you were starting out in this space of being healthy, but then you kind of went right over into the space of the extremes. And so I guess a question I have for you here is, when did you realize that you maybe had taken it a little too far with some of these behaviors and habits that you had developed?
Yeah, and I think it took me a while to realize that I had gone too far. But I think there's a couple of different things, right? Of realizing, my cycle has been gone for 2.5 years, which for women, that is like a vital sign of our health. And so I sometimes would kind of write that off of, I was in college, I was maybe stressed. So like I kind of just put that off. But in the back of my mind, I knew that's a red flag that I'm not getting my cycle for 2.5 years. So I think that was part of it. But also, too, just realizing how much I felt like my healthy lifestyle was actually taking away from my life because I was being healthy, but to what point, right? Because I was so obsessive about things, of constantly thinking about, well, if I don't get this long of a workout, do I need to like make up for that later? Or if I miss a day, then what? Or if I'm going out to dinner with my friends and family, can I actually enjoy myself? Or am I constantly thinking about, okay, what's like the healthiest option on the menu, even if it's not something I'm going to enjoy? Right? It got to a point where for me, being healthy was taking away from my life, and quote unquote healthy because it wasn't. But at the time, I definitely thought it was. So I think it's when I got to a point where I kind of put all the pieces together. I don't have my cycle. I'm really lean when I shouldn't be, especially for women. We need a higher level of body fat percentage. And again, I was in school for this stuff. So I knew these things. And so kind of piecing all of that together, but then also recognizing I felt like I wasn't able to enjoy things the way I wanted to because of the like anxiety that can come with those obsessive behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to know, like, what did what did it take, or what did those beginning steps look like for you when you chose that you maybe wanted to say goodbye or work on addressing some of these behaviors and habits that you developed? What did that process look like for you?
Yeah, so I actually hired a coach, which coaches need coaches too. I think is super powerful. But because I realized, one, I don't want to live like this anymore. I know something needs to change, but I also know that I needed some support and I needed some help because when you're in your own journey, a lot of things, there's a lot of emotional ties to things. And so when you have help from someone else, or even if it's like just your support system, having their objective view on things can be really helpful. So I was like, okay, I'm going to hire a coach just to kind of, help me get back into a place where I know I'm doing the right things, but I also have someone in my corner encouraging me because I knew it was not going to be easy. So I think one, well, also two, kind of backtracking, before I hired a coach, I, recognized something needed to change. So I would kind of start slow. Like, okay, instead of doing cardio 5 times a week, let's drop it back to maybe 3 or 4. And instead of strength training, 6 times a week, let's go back to 5. And like slowly pulling back. And it was really uncomfortable at first, but it was also kind of one of those things where if I don't change, nothing else is going to change, right? I have to change in order to see the positive change that I'm looking for. So I started that and then I hired a coach to kind of help me navigate everything. Um, and yeah, that's where I started with that.
Yeah, I love that you kind of you knew that some habits needed to change, and I love that you were realistic with yourself when you were beginning to recognize, okay, what can I change to what I'm currently doing to kind of help me heal and work on some of these things that I've done in the past. And I think that's the beauty of kind of entering into the space of recovery is that, it looks differently for everyone. And I know that I resonate a lot with the steps that you took, as I also struggled with obsessive exercising, obsessive eating, needing to eat clean. And that was part of my own journey as well, was taking a step back, reducing the number of days I was training. And that's what worked for me. But I think the beauty of recovery is, it looks differently for everyone. And I think for those that find themselves needing more formalized treatment setting and not being able to move at all, right? Where it just I feel like it really shows this spectrum of what recovery can look like depending on maybe severity of some of these behaviors, and also the type of medical assistance an individual might need. So I kind of want to dive into this part of the conversation now. But so you had mentioned that you kind of are in the space of nutrition and fitness and wellness. But I'm curious to know, what is your experience with being in that space, after having your own lived experience with disordered eating?
Yeah, I think at first it was a little bit difficult just because I wanted to make sure, and I feel like I was really hyper aware of I don't want to do anything to put my clients or even the messaging that I'm putting on social media. I don't want any of that to portray any of those maybe habits or mindsets that I used to have. So I think I really tried to focus on how can I provide people with the tools and the education, especially around fitness and nutrition, in a way that's going to empower them, but also work with their lifestyles and not create any sort of that negative mindset that can come up. So I think at first I was just very hyper aware of my messaging and how I spoke to clients, and I'm still, aware of that now. But I think now I'm more comfortable because I've been doing it for 4 years. Um, I'm more comfortable in terms of helping people navigate those specific mindsets or situations around food and nutrition because it's very common in men and women, both, to have negative relationships with food or emotional ties to the scale or all of the things that can pop up. Um, so I would say, it's been really rewarding because now that I am healed and I have, the best relationship I've had with myself, with nutrition, with exercise, I've been able to, I feel like, kind of pass that on to other people, and try to create that sort of balanced mindset in others in a way that's not going to create any sort of negative relationships. So I think for me, the biggest thing is really education and empathy is kind of how I lead my coaching because there's a lot of reasons that people have a lot of different emotional connections to different things, especially around nutrition and training and your body. So it's kind of navigating that on an individual basis and kind of working through things in a way that people respond to. And also, to, again, like I said, just bringing education into it, I think is really helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mackenzie. So I'm curious to know, what has your experience been like, maybe navigating some of these expectations that may have been placed upon you in the way that your body looks as a personal trainer?
Yeah, I think it was definitely hard coming into the personal training space and in the fitness industry and feeling like I had to look a certain way. Otherwise, people weren't going to take me seriously because, you would see things online of, well, if you're a personal trainer, you better look the part. You have to have, big muscles, you have to be lean, otherwise no one's going to take you seriously. And so I think that also kind of fed into some of the obsessiveness that I had as I was learning about nutrition and, getting my personal training certification and going to school is, well, I better look the part. Otherwise, what's the point? No one's going to want to hire me. My clients won't take me seriously. So that was definitely difficult at first, because, it's kind of like an unspoken, not so much anymore. I guess it depends kind of where you're working, and social media is a little bit different. But when I worked in person, I felt like that was kind of an unspoken sort of mold that you had to fit into of, if you're a personal trainer, you should look the part. And so I feel like, besides the pressure that I was already putting on myself to look a certain way, I also felt that external pressure from just working in the fitness industry. So that was definitely difficult to kind of break away from that, but it was definitely really hard at first.
Yeah, I guess, what does that relationship look like for you today with some of those expectations? Does it even cross your mind at all that you feel like you need to have your body look a certain way, or what? I'm just curious to know.
Nope, not so much anymore because I'm more focused on helping people find those like feelings of what healthy feels like to them. And so it's not so much, focused on your physical health and what that looks like. And, I'm talking to my clients about how they can be healthier from like an internal health perspective, a movement perspective, not so much of, you need to look a certain way. So I'm also not going to put that sort of pressure on myself either because I know that health is not just what I look like.
First of all, I think your clients are so lucky to be able to work with you, because I follow you
Oh, thank you.
via social media and I see the messaging you put out there. And I love when you create content that kind of demystifies what diet culture has so deeply reinforced within a lot of our minds within society. So I'm curious to know, like, as you work individually with your clients, what do you feel are some of like the biggest things that you try to demystify with them when it comes to diet culture and some of those rules that, have been deemed quote unquote healthy, but actually aren't?
Yeah, I would say the biggest one that popped into my head as soon as you asked me that question was when we tend to put morals on our food, or, we deem things as good or bad when it comes to nutrition and fitness. There's Diet culture has perpetuated this very black and white thinking when it comes to what health is, when in reality, there is a lot of gray area, there is a lot of nuance because it's not so black and white. So I think that's the biggest thing that I see pop up is sort of that all or nothing thinking when it comes to your health journey, right? Where you have to be perfect all of the time, eating all of the good foods, the right foods, doing all of the exercise all of the time. And if you don't, then you're bad, or you're doing something wrong, or you're not healthy, or you're not going to see progress towards your goals, whatever has been perpetuated in the media. I feel like that's the biggest one. So, really, just kind of teaching people there is a gray area, there is an in between where you can still, you know, eat nutritious foods, but you can also eat not non-nutritious foods too, and you can have that balance, and you can still be healthy, and you can still, reach your goals or whatever it might be, and it doesn't have to be so black and white.
But yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I see as well when I hear from people or when I'm, having conversations with folks around this, where people think that food is good or bad, this is healthy or unhealthy. And I think we really need to get out of this dichotomy when it comes to talking about food and removing moral value from food and fitness, where if I don't burn X number of calories in a workout, it wasn't a good workout. Or if I don't leave a workout feeling dead, then I didn't do it right. And I think we've just gotten so used to a lot of these behaviors and habits and sayings that they become so normalized. And I don't think people realize how detrimental saying those things and reinforcing those things are to not only themselves, but the people around them as well.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times too, when you have that sort of good and bad, black and white thinking, there's a lot of, to your point, a lot of like shame and guilt and negative emotions that can pop up if you're not falling on that good side of things. So, exactly when it's reiterated, good food, bad food, you start to take that on yourself. And if you don't eat the good foods, then you don't feel, you think you're a bad person or you did something wrong, and there's guilt and shame. And then it just creates this negative cycle and negative mindset. And a lot of times that's when that sort of obsessive behavior can start to pop up because you don't want to feel guilty, you don't want to feel shameful of anything, so you're always trying to be perfect. And that's how it started for me, because I was very much the black and white thinking, and I wanted to eat all the good foods and be healthy, and if I didn't, then I felt bad, and so it just created this super vicious cycle.
Yeah, and I am a firm believer that that kind of disordered eating or eating disorder voice latches on to that shame and guilt, and it finds opportunities to make that happen within, because once it manifests within, that's when we're most vulnerable and susceptible to engaging in a lot of these unhealthy behaviors. And so a lot of it is, can you recognize when you feel this shame and guilt, right? Like, for those that haven't done much work in this space, that awareness component can be challenging, right? To kind of really tune in and take the moment to pause. That can be really challenging. But I think where the healing continues to happen and how you can really deepen yourself into your own recovery is that next question, right? Or the next questions of, why am I feeling this shame and guilt? And trying to zoom out and see the bigger picture, right? Of like what is influencing why I'm feeling this way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you start to dig into those questions, it is hard and it can feel really heavy. So, if you are in that position right now where maybe you are wanting to ask yourself those questions, give yourself grace and empathy as you are working through it. Because I know for me personally, it was really hard to kind of break down, well, why do I feel guilty for this? Or why am I afraid of, you know, this or gaining weight or, all of the things that kind of tie into that. It is heavy, but it's the necessary kind of reflection that you have to do to be able to understand where it's coming from because like you said that awareness really is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think when we enter into that space, it's almost as if we're holding a mirror up to ourselves. But I really shouldn't say ourselves. I feel like we're really holding a mirror up to that disordered eating voice. And the disordered eating voice or the eating disorder voice doesn't like to get called out on its bullshit, right? So it's going to try and like sneak back into the picture, I think, and try to convince you that it's not the problem and that you individually are the problem. And so I think it's really important to recognize that when you are entering into this space, it's important to recognize that, yes, these thoughts may come up, but these thoughts really aren't your thoughts, right? Like you as the individual. We have to separate ourselves as, Eric and McKenzie versus this identity and entity that almost takes over our body and mind when we're in the depths of really struggling.
Yeah, which sometimes when you're in the moment too, it's hard to even conceptualize that because it feels like it's a part of you. So it's hard to know, like, is this actually how I feel about things or is it not? So I think that is like a perfect reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question, I have for you is when you find yourself working with clients that, may have a different mindset or kind of some of these thoughts, right, that are diet culture thoughts or things that have been deeply reinforced, how do you work with them to kind of address those thoughts?
Yeah. I think it circles back to what we were just talking about is kind of bringing that awareness around the thoughts that are happening, right? Of, when you think about something in a certain way, like for example, if you feel guilty about not going to the gym, if you have to miss a day or something, that can be a simple one to kind of start with. But why? Why are you feeling guilty for that? And kind of diving into it and just keep asking why, which sometimes, if you're the one who's working through those questions, can feel really annoying. But it's really helpful to kind of get down to that sort of root of why am I feeling this way? And then once you start to understand, well, I feel guilty because if I miss my workout, then that means, sometimes for some people it can be I'm going to gain weight. Okay, well, why would that be an issue if you're going to gain weight? And you kind of dive into all of these little things where it branches off. Um, so even just sometimes working through those questions and bringing awareness can be super helpful because then you can recognize when those thought patterns are popping up and you can start to work on reframing them and thinking about things in a different way. So I think, the biggest thing for me when I work with clients is one, establishing the awareness, working through some understanding of where is that coming from, and then also from there, what's a more positive way that we can approach this or a different way that we can reframe things that is more healthy and more beneficial in the long run.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. And especially with your last comment, too, of the importance of learning how to shift the narrative, right? Because I feel like when we enter into these spaces where, we think negatively, especially when it comes to, oh, if I miss a day of working out, I'm going to gain weight. Well, what if we shift that narrative and say, actually, me taking a day of rest is going to make me be able to show up stronger for the next time I choose to engage in movement. And if you think about the power between those two statements, like the second one, of course, is a lot more quote unquote healthy, or it allows us to offer ourselves some grace and self compassion and kind of remove us from that black and white thinking, or reinforcing some of these beliefs that, diet culture has so deeply um, reinforced within our society.
Yeah, and when you reframe it like that too, it just it even just saying it out loud like that sent those two examples that you gave, you can just tell the difference between the two and how you would feel if you were saying that to yourself. It's such a stark difference. And when you are more, I don't know if anyone's listening has ever watched Ted Lasso, but he has a quote that says, approach things with curiosity rather than judgment. And I think that can be super powerful too, of in those moments of not going to the gym. Instead of judging myself of like, I'm going to gain weight or I need to make this up later, instead, if we could just reframe things a little bit and be like, it's okay because I can show up better tomorrow and kind of work through it in that way, you just feel lighter even talking about it in that way. So, yeah, working through reframes can be super powerful.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I'm curious to know, because this is part of my own journey still, but I feel like as I do, quote unquote, do the work, right, which is a very popular phrase in society, but, as I continue to deepen myself in my own recovery, I often find that, I feel like a lot of this work is values work and reshifting the values that I have in my own life, and unlearning a lot of, these values that I thought were so essential and critical to my life. But I'm curious to know, do you do any sort of values work with your clients, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I would say that's something that we dive into pretty often. I mean, it depends on the individual, but I think really at the end of the day, it's kind of that question of what is the most important thing to you, right? Like, one example I like to use with clients is okay, if you were to think about yourself, like some future thinking, if you were to think about yourself in 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, what is the most important thing that is going to bring you joy? Like, what is valuable to you? What is really going to be important to you? And a lot of the times when people reflect on that, it's not the number on the scale, it's not the size of the clothes that they wear or how small they are or anything like that. It's typically, I want to be able to have the energy to keep up with my kids. I want to be able to feel confident in my skin. I want to be able to, do these activities that I do now in a year from now, in 5 years from now. So even just kind of values, but also putting things into perspective of what's truly important and what truly matters to you, I think that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And, I've begun to shift the way that, I view my relationship with fitness. And, I used to be all about lifting as heavy as possible every single day and just like running my body into the ground. But now I feel like I've really begun to shift my perspective to, be able to engage in fitness from like a longevity standpoint, right? Of like, I want to be able to continue to do this in the long
Mhm.
run. I know if I continue to run my body into the ground each and every day, that's not going to be possible. So, as a personal trainer and as someone in this space, what are things that, people can do in the space of fitness that, can help them approach fitness in this way, through the lens of, longevity, as opposed to, maybe this other mindset of, working our bodies to the point of exhaustion?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it can really start with first identifying what type of movement brings you joy. What type of movement do you truly enjoy? Because at the end of the day, we're human, like as humans, it's going to be hard for us to continue as something long term if we don't truly enjoy it. So I think first just identifying, you know, strength training, yes, is really great and really powerful from a longevity standpoint, but sometimes for some people, we first just need to get more forms of movement that actually are fun to you. So for some people, that can be like hiking or rock climbing or even just walking and biking, right? So first, just kind of diving into what types of movement do you really enjoy and starting there, because that's going to help create that more healthy relationship with movement and exercise because it's no longer a form of punishment, which I don't know if you can relate to that, but I feel like at some parts in my journey, exercise was a form of punishment for me, you know, because I needed to work harder or burn more calories, or it was punishment for food that I ate, whatever the reason was. And so, kind of shifting away from that, of viewing movement as something that is going to bring you happiness and you're going to feel excited to do it. So, first, just starting there, and kind of going from that point forward.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. And, I think that's something that's been on my mind too, is, in the space of intuitive movement, which is something that I feel like I'm really starting to tap into more and more on a daily basis and on a weekly basis. Um, just that finding joy, right? Like moving our bodies is such a gift. And, that's what I think about most often whenever I feel like I engage in movement, is that, like, wow, my body can do amazing things, and me moving is a way to be able to celebrate that. And I've really begun to shift my perspective, I think, when entering into the space of fitness and engaging in movement, where before I would, if I wasn't able to lift as much as, the last time I lifted a particular muscle group, like, I would beat myself up, right? Of like, I'm a failure because I didn't lift more. But now I've really begun to shift the narrative of like, that's okay. Like, I don't need to lift as much. Like, I'm here, I'm showing up, and I'm giving my best. And that's really all that matters. Right. And I think even beginning to shift some of the language that we use intra workout, right, as opposed to maybe before and after, can be equally as powerful. But I'm curious to know that now that we're kind of on this topic of ways to move that bring you joy, kind of a lighthearted question, but what are some of the things that bring you joy in the space of movement?
I love that. I would say, right, my favorite, walking. I love walking. I go on walks multiple times a day, and I feel fortunate enough, to be able to do that. I work from home. I have a safe walking area. Walking, I recently got back into soccer. I, grew up playing soccer, and I play in a recreational league. I like to go hiking. And of course, I love strength training, but it's very much a more balanced part of my routine. So, yeah, those are my favorites at the moment: walking, hiking, soccer, and strength training.
That's awesome. I've tried to get, days that I feel like I maybe need a little bit of an energy boost, or, I feel like I'm just silly at the core and I just love that part of myself. But some days in the morning for my movement, I actually put on like a 20-minute Zumba class on YouTube on my TV. And I just like, even though I'm terrible at any sort of choreographed dance, like dancing brings me joy, and I actually embrace the fact that I'm not good at it. And so sometimes I feel like I, just make up my own dance moves.
Yeah, that's what makes it more fun, is when you are like, I'm not really good at this, but that's fine. I'm just here to move my body and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the same thing with golf. Like I golf in the summer months. And am I good at it? No. But am I moving my body? Yes. Is it a form of vigorous movement? No. Is that okay? Yes. But does it bring me joy? Hell yeah. But it's just, I think people need to begin to realize that, like you had said earlier, moving your body should never be a punishment. Like it should be something that, before you engage in movement, you should be excited to do so because it's something that's going to bring you joy, and you as an individual joy, not diet culture joy, not that disordered eating voice joy, but something that you as the individual living in your body that brings you joy.
Yeah, and to your point too about golf, because I also like to golf in the summertime, is that it doesn't have to be anything strenuous. It doesn't have to be anything super intense, like golfing, bowling, anything that just gets your body moving that you enjoy, do more of it. Like, and I think that can sometimes be hard too. And I know that's actually something that I feel like I kind of struggled with as well when I was wanting to, I moved away from doing a lot of cardio or a lot of really intense things, and tapping into more lower intensity things was really difficult for me because I felt that voice again, you're not doing enough, you need to be sweating more, so a lot of that reframe kind of came into place, but absolutely.
Yeah, so now that we're kind of entering into this space, if you could give like any words of advice, or if there are any other kind of like big picture ideas when it comes to, kind of the health and fitness space with things that are commonly heard, what are some of those kind of things that also need to continue to be demystified, kind of when we enter into that space of health and wellness?
Yeah, I think you and I both might have shared something like this on social media lately. And it's that idea around, thinness does not equate to healthy. I think that is one that, we will be fighting tooth and nail for a while because that is so perpetuated in media and just in honestly like cultural norms in the US, I feel like. Um, but that is definitely one of them, is that, thinness does not equate to healthiness. And that's something that I struggled with for a while because I always wanted to be thinner. I always wanted to be smaller because in my head, that was the ideal, like, pinnacle of health. And sure, I got to that point where I was really thin, really lean, but like I've talked about before, at what cost? I was not healthy when I was at my thinnest or my leanest. Um, because, when I was in that space, my mindset was terrible. A lot of that shame and guilt and the disordered thinking, disordered eating, and also, going back to my cycle again and just other health markers weren't great. So, kind of breaking that down again, it all just kind of goes back to like awareness and reflection, I feel like. Because a lot of the times it can be, asking yourself, well, why do you want to be smaller or thinner? Or why do you think that that is the ideal image of health? Um, so I don't know if that answered your question, but really just kind of like that's one of the biggest norms that I feel like is the most prevalent in a lot of people, men and women, everyone. So just kind of being able to break that down and really change the narrative around what healthy actually is rather than what it physically looks like.
Yes, 100%. And I will like die on a hill. And I think, your point that you had just mentioned is like what I believe to be so true, and is in a lot of the work that I do, is that, we need to begin to approach health from more than just a physical perspective, right? Because, like you, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but like, I feel like, like you had just mentioned, that even though you felt that you were in a smaller body and you quote unquote felt healthy, you noticed you were having some, like, your relationship with your mind and the thoughts that you were having weren't healthy. And so I really think this highlights the need to be able to approach health from a more holistic perspective, where we are taking into account our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health, and our spiritual health. Like, all of those things interact with each other on a daily basis. And when we find ourselves in balance in all of those areas, that's when we're living our most optimal and prime lives, right? Because we're recognizing that there is more to life than just each of these buckets that I had just mentioned, and that we're realizing that it's important to not focus just on our physical health, but it's also important to focus on our mental health as well. And that's what health is. Health is not just physical. It really is a umbrella term that has all of these different areas underneath it, or like a piece of the pie, right? Like it's not just physical health, but there's all these other tenants within that pie.
Yeah. And that's a lot of people, right? Because we've been kind of conditioned to think that health is physical, it's how you look. You can look at someone and say, oh, they're healthy because XYZ. When in reality, you don't know what their mental health is like. You don't know what their emotional, spiritual, or even like physiological health is like, too. And so, exactly, it's kind of taking a larger view of health rather than just narrow minded, kind of looking at physical only.
Absolutely. And I think, this blends perfectly into the next question that I have for you. But, I feel like when we can begin to move out of solely viewing health as something that's physical, and kind of enter into these other spaces, right, of thinking about our mental health and our emotional health, I feel like that really allows us to embrace our whole self a little bit more and not just viewing ourselves as a physical byproduct and of something that's just solely physical on this planet. But the title of this podcast is Embracing You. So I guess two questions for you. One, how does your own recovery allow you to embrace yourself more? And two, how does the work that you do allow others to embrace themselves more?
Yeah, I love those questions. So I think the first one, in terms of, how has my recovery allowed me to embrace myself more, is I feel like I have been able to slow down and I've been able to give myself rest and space, because for a lot of my, when I was in my disordered eating times, I just, constantly, like, I'm thinking about food and being perfect and spending a lot of time in the gym and always needing to get my steps in. And it was just exhausting, to be honest, from a mental standpoint. I'm sure you can relate to that as well. It just feels like you can never relax because you're always thinking about, what you should be doing, maybe what you did wrong. It's just like never ending. And so I feel like now, I'm at a place where feel like, I have the healthiest mental state that I've been in physically, just it's very well rounded. So I'm able to actually rest and give myself space to do more things that I love, things that also aren't physical related. So I spend, a lot of time like reading. I've learned new hobbies. I've really kind of like dug into things that are things that I'm passionate about that don't really have anything to do with exercise or nutrition. And so I feel like I've been able to, as cheesy as this might sound, I feel like I've been able to actually kind of understand who I am more, and going back to those values of what's actually important to me. And so making sure I'm spending more time doing that. And it's so much fun. It's so great to be able to kind of reflect on how far I've come and where I am now and how I show up for myself differently. Um, so yeah, I think it's really allowed me to embrace myself by doing more things that I really love and not feeling guilty for it, and actually making sure I create time and space to do those things.
That's so awesome. And, I'm also a firm believer that, the road to recovery is the road back to our true self. And I think once we are to that point in our recovery, where we feel most connected to ourselves, it's when we're engaging in a lot of these things that, we haven't done for such a long period of time. And, the disordered eating voice or eating disorder voice loses its power, right? Like you are filling your mind with new thoughts, new hobbies, and you've challenged that voice long enough, right? Where, these are the most prominent thoughts now and things that you want to do that lie within your own mind. So that makes me so happy to hear that, this is the most connected to yourself that you've ever felt, because I think it's important for people to know, if they're listening and are struggling, that, it is worth all of the hard work you put into your own recovery. And there are going to be days that are so challenging, and there are going to be moments where you feel like you've taken 10 steps backwards. But, ultimately in the end, I mean, from your own experience, and I can, back that up as well with my own experience, but life is such a gift, and it's so wonderful to be able to view life from that perspective now, and to also be engaging in a lot of these things that bring me happiness and joy as well. And so that makes me so incredibly happy for you, Mackenzie. And it just shows on social media too that it really does feel like you're living your best life right now, and you are filled with happiness. And I love seeing what books you're reading. I love seeing what activities you're up to. And like you said, like, a lot of what you're doing now is so well balanced and well rounded, and it's not just health and fitness. And I think you are being such a positive role model, not only for your clients, but all of the content you're putting out there. Like, I just love how balanced, that's the word that continues to come to my mind. And I love that you're becoming an advocate in this space of, health and wellness and fitness, where you're not afraid to challenge a lot of these misconceptions within that space. And, I think that's why I feel like your clients and those that follow you are so lucky to be following and working with you, because you are, if I could duplicate you like a million times, and a lot of the health and wellness trainers were, speaking a lot of the points that you do and living what you practice, like, this space would be a lot less toxic and more welcoming and inviting for individuals.
Oh, I appreciate that. And yeah, exactly too, to what you said about just even thinking back, like going through the healing journey of it is going to be difficult. It's going to feel really uncomfortable, but it is so worth it in the end to come out the other side and have this new viewpoint on life and just how you view yourself. Because, as difficult as that part of my life was, I don't think I would really trade it for anything, because it's taught me so much. And it's, you can relate to this too. It's made you who you are today, and it gives you such a different perspective on things. And so I really appreciate that. I love that.
Yeah, of course. And I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. And I just respect you so much, not only as an individual, but as a professional in the space of health and wellness and fitness. And so kind of, I've just spoken a lot about the work that you do and the posts that you've made on social media. So if people are looking to find you, where can they find you?
Yes. So I have Instagram. My handle is Mackenzie.Ann with three N's.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to tag your Instagram handle in the show notes for folks. So if they are wanting to kind of dig deeper into a lot of the work that you've been posting via social media, I'll make sure that they have the actual handle in the show notes as well. But Mackenzie, this was such a treat to be able to not only reconnect as friends, but also kind of more in this professional space of talking about, the work that you do with your clients, and talking a little bit about your own journey with disordered eating. But I just want to thank you so much for your vulnerability, and just for all the work that you're doing to help make the space of health and wellness a more, in my words, healthier space and more balanced space to be. So thank you again so much. And I just appreciate you and our friendship so much.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. And also for you with what you're doing with this podcast and your Instagram as well. is amazing because I feel like, kind of like we were talking about before, it really challenges the common narratives in the diet culture space, which is extremely important. So I appreciate you for having me on. It was fun.
Thank you. Once again, I would like to give a big thank you to Mackenzie for her time and all of her knowledge and wisdom she was able to share with you all today. So, until next time, I hope you all continue to take care of yourselves. You begin to really think about why you engage in movement and if you are truly in a space to enjoy movement. And most importantly, I hope you really take the time to celebrate all that your body does for you on a daily basis and continue to send it love. Much love.